out the ticket lady's coming. I forgot my ticket. Get some money out of it. Hopefully she'll let me on board.
Next week.
These guys have got my ticket.
Yep, this is Sydney, and these are trams. Although you may not have spotted one around town since 1961. If you're old enough, that is. Here at the Sydney Tramway Museum, they're still rattling their way along the tracks.
Everyone wants the window seat. You can stand up. There's no seatbelts in here either, is there? Nanny went to work on the tram, did she?
This trip is heading towards the Royal National Park, winding its way past what was the old Prince's Highway, with the tram's faster cousin speeding by on the other side.
Different from the Tango, isn't it?
Real different.
Speed's not everything. To get there, we've also got to cross the old highway. I'd say there'd be a few surprised motorists. Amazingly, back in the tram's heyday in the 1940s, over 400 million passengers rode the Sydney trams every year. That's more passengers than State Rail carries today.
What were your experiences on the trams? Did you ever ride in the trams?
A long, long time ago, to Bondi.
To Bondi, was
Yeah.
it? Sydney to the Bondi.
That's right.
And Brighton as well?
Yeah.
You used to go to the beach there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This trip finishes in the Royal National Park. We can head off for a day's walking or just stand around chatting until the old rattler heads on back.
Oh, why did that stop?
Why did it stop?
It's at the end of the track.
Of the track, you see.
For some of the people here today, riding the trams is a way of bringing back some good old memories and teaching the young ones a bit about the past.
You wouldn't know what it'd be like without a car, would you? No, didn't think you would.
The museum also has an undercover display packed with trams from everywhere. There's trams from Brisbane, Melbourne, Ballarat, and some a long way from home. This one's interesting. It's a prison tram used to move prisoners between Long Bay Jail and Darlinghurst in the 1950s. But the best thing about this museum is it's active. And this is one of the best rides on what's known as a toast rack.
Sit in here?
Yeah.
All right, I'll jump in. Move over.
Yeah, pass the camera.
Oh, how are you? Good. Where are you all from? Not that far. You been out on the tram before?
No.
Should be good, eh?
Yeah.
Good to see they all agree with each other.
Kick of the kids.
But probably more than anything, it's the people running the museum that make it what it is. These guys don't earn a cent for their time and effort they put into keeping part of our history alive. The reward is seeing the enjoyment it gives to others.
Join the train ride? Yeah! You been at National Park yet? Yeah! Next trip.
It's somehow a bit sad to think that the old trams were scrapped to be taken place by things like the monorail. They may have caused their own traffic problems, but there's quite a few people here today that wouldn't mind having them back.
So who liked the trams? Put your hand up. Yes, everybody. Everybody loves the trams.
The Sydney Tramway Museum is at the corner of Pitt Street and the Prince's Highway at Loftus. It's open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays and public holidays and costs $8 for adults and $4 for children and concessions.
At 1:30 this morning, the driver managed to hold the knife away. Police swooped and overpowered him. "29-year-old Harold John Wilmot
blocking the Callide to Gladstone line near Billawheeler.
Railway engineers arrived in the night to face yet another massive clean-up operation. This time 40 carriages off the track, all fully laden. Once again, Gladstone Powerhouse had to wait for its coal.
Well, we've got approximately 1,500 tonnes at the moment. We hope to recover as much as that as we can.
This morning, Queensland Rail put into action what is now a well-rehearsed operation. While technicians tried to find out what happened, machinery was brought in to clear 2 kilometres of track. Climactic conditions are again believed the culprit. A sudden drop in temperature shrinking.
Workers took most of the morning to clear the line between Bowen Hills and Albion.
Melbourne, you think trams. And there are some trams. We're at the South Melbourne Tram Depot, and this is part of the fleet here that comprises the largest operating network in the English-speaking world. I think the other one on about the same scale is Calcutta. But certainly this is the last remaining in Sydney, last remaining in Australia. I might just have to walk around the other side of that. And one of the reasons the trams survived in Melbourne is because at around the time when everybody else was pulling theirs up, 50s, 60s, or 40s, 50s and 60s, the head of the trams was a bloke called Major General Risen, and he was a great aficionado of trams, and there was also the timely advent of the Olympics, so he had a good excuse to lay some more track, and it was a big push. He was well connected with governments, and there was a big push to keep the trams alive, and indeed he's done so, and it's flourishing still. And it's very characteristic of Melbourne, I'm sure you'll agree. And in a moment, or rather in the next half hour, we'll have a look at one of the very old trams and see why it's still going. Meanwhile, though, we should have a look at the weather around the country and see what's going on while I wait.
Where are you going?
For a drive. Look, I hope I know how to drive this. I'm really trying.
Oh, my gosh.
How do I make it go?
Mon's at the helm. If you're in Melbourne, please steer clear of 855.
Switch on the what? I want to make it go. This is my big opportunity to make...
Okay, hang on, no. Can't do anything yet. Can't do anything.
Don't do anything yet, he's saying.
Let's get this sucker going. Right, let's get that cameraman.
Hang on. Line breakers.
It's very hard, isn't it? I thought this was a lethal machine. I could just run over people.
Yeah.
Get him.
Mon, do you know you're still on air?
There you go.
Yeah?
Oh, that's okay. I just want to warn you.
May have taken up a little long. Get it going. Get this sucker going. See you later.
We're on.
We're away, baby. Yes. Go. Smash that one.
I'm really glad the audio's breaking up. It could have been dangerous.
Okay, thank you very much. We're at the South Melbourne Tram Depot, and we've learnt something about trams this morning. You see this odd-looking contraption here, wheelbarrow-looking thing, full of sand, Roscoe?
What is it, Mont?
Well, it's a
wheelbarrow full of sand.
thing with sand. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, Roscoe. But every tram has a supply of sand on it for reasons which I hadn't even considered before, but they're to do with the weather. At this time of the year in particular, when a lot of leaves fall on the track, they're a bit oily, the track loses traction, become very slippery, so they fill these two front seats up with sand, and there's a little mechanism in the cabin there which activates, opens a valve, and down the sand goes onto the track to give the tram traction. Hadn't considered that myself. I don't know whether you'd given it... You knew that, didn't you?
I knew that. I'm an intrepid tram traveller from way back.
Yeah, that'd be something in isolation in your head then. That's really good that you picked that up. But this has been wonderfully renovated in old style. It's got... I'll just back Mal off here a little bit. This is television as it happens. It hasn't got doors. It's got the old sliding thingamajigs, sliding blinds. And it goes back to... This was built in about It works really well. I don't know what that is. Stop you falling out. But it was built in about 1930, 1934, and it's part of this network of trams which has about 236 kilometres in the metropolitan area of Sydney and over 500 trams. So it's a pretty big system. In fact, it's the largest in the English-speaking world. We won't dwell on that. I'll show you just how to activate that sand in just a moment when we come back from the maps. But first, the weather around the country. And there's the map there. Here in the cabin. And if I press this button like that, the sand will come out of a little pipe near the front wheel there. And I can only assume that's working. That's the one. That's the one, and that'll give us a bit of traction. So that if we want to make the little sucker go, we ring the bell like that. We take that one off there, I think, or in the centre. And I'm trying to go forward. I had this worked out, Lizzie. I'm sure I had...
Mont.
I let go of the brake and I want it to go. Yes. I've nearly killed Roberta. How?
Well done, Mont. Done it again.
Roberta, that was very foolish. Yeah.
Hey, Mont.
Okay. Yeah, that's my tram career. Nicked in the bud. Yeah.
Monto, I recommend you give that man his fare back.
The which?
His fare back. I think he needs his money back.
Oh, money back.
Nice to
He's the
speak to
boss.
you, Mon.
He's the boss. See you later.
Okay.
He was stunned that all on board survived the high-speed rail disaster.
We're looking back and thinking, how the hell did we get out of it?
What holds the key to the cause as investigators find out whether something's wrong with Queensland's glamour train?
But clearly something went wrong. We will find out what went wrong, and clearly we'll take appropriate action to fix it in the future.
Good evening, I'm Bill McDonald.
And I'm Marie-Louise Beale, and even while caught in the drama, survivors found time for a laugh.
We started hammering out the window and somebody down the back says, oh, he said, you'll get paid, you'll have to pay for that window. You know, everybody cracked up.
But first, safety investigators are scrutinising the wreck of the Cairns-bound tilt train. The black box data recorder could hold the key to the high-speed crash. More than 120 people were injured when the train derailed north of Bundaberg in the middle of the night. Most have now been released from hospital. Rescuers are astonished no one was killed.
The high-speed diesel tilt train was approaching a bend just before midnight when, without warning, it slewed off the track. One after another, the carriages speared out of control, ploughing into surrounding bush, leaving just one engine remaining on the line. The 150 passengers on board were sleeping or resting when the ill-fated journey came to a sudden and terrifying halt, 60 kilometres north of the central Queensland city of Bundaberg.
It just started jumping and then on its side and just slid in and hit the bank and stopped.
There's all trees in the front of our carriage. All the bush, you know, we couldn't believe, we didn't know where we were, what had happened.
Still shocked and dazed, hours later, they couldn't believe they'd walked away.
She went underneath the seat, so yeah.
What did you think?
Scary, very lucky, yeah, because if the seat wasn't there, she would have went straight out the doors.
Locals who rushed to the scene to help couldn't believe the destruction. George Pauser, who was first there, alerted authorities to the disaster.
People started streaming out and there's a barbed wire fence and they were getting caught up in that, so I had to get it cut.
Miraculously, almost all of the passengers and 7 crew emerged from the twisted remains of the train with few or no injuries. However, 2 were critically hurt and flown to Bundaberg Hospital for treatment.
We've had 155 people that we've treated or transported. Of that, the majority of the injuries have been fractures, burns, multiple lacerations, head injuries, chest injuries.
The $65 million tilt train had been in service since June last year. The track it came to grief on was only inspected and cleared just yesterday.
There were no major concerns raised in terms of the standard of the track. It's a good quality track.
Premier Peter Beattie toured the crash scene in disbelief.
Our reaction is, thank God no one was killed. When you look at the site, it is in fact a miracle that no one was. When you look at the damage to the trains.
Queensland Transport and the Australian Transport Safety Bureau will spend the next few days interviewing witnesses. The track, which is the main line north, is expected to remain closed for the next 48 hours. Analysis of the train's black box data recorder will be central to investigations.
Now we're looking back and thinking, how the hell did we get out of it?
The tilt train, but that's a bit too much tilt for me.
Jamie Rule, 10 News.
And Jamie joins us now from the crash site at Rosedale, north of Bundaberg, where investigators have been examining the train wreckage. Now, Jamie, is there any clue at this stage what caused the accident?
Well, Bill, at this stage, there's no clear indication of what caused the crash. We do know that there are 3 separate investigations underway, one by the Queensland Police, another by Queensland Rail, and of course, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau is also conducting its own investigation. Importantly, the black box or data recorder was retrieved from the train today. Similar to those installed in commercial airliners, it's hoped it'll pinpoint or give some indication of what might have caused the crash, or maybe even the speed the train was travelling at in the moments leading up to the accident.
Well, you mentioned speed there, and this train travels at speeds of up to 150 kilometres an hour. Could excessive speed have caused the train to derail?
Well, Bill, that's expected to become a central part of the investigation. Only a few hundred metres up the track from the accident scene, it's a 150 km/h zone. Of course, coming up to the bend where the accident took place, it drops to 60 km/h. Now, there have been conflicting reports from some witnesses about how fast the train was travelling, and investigators are now amassing those statements in an attempt to actually find out what took place.
Jamie, what do we know about the drivers from the train?
Not all that much about the drivers, their record, or anything about the drivers in particular, other than the fact that they boarded the train in Bundaberg, therefore fatigues not expected to become part of the investigation. They were only at the controls for around an hour. Now, one of the drivers actually returned to the scene this morning to assist police with their investigations, and that's despite the fact that he was obviously in pain with a rather large head injury, which was being treated at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Jamie Rule, from the crash scene at the Tilt train via video phone.
The two drivers from the train were both injured in the accident, as were almost all of the passengers and crew. In the darkness of early morning, paramedics rushed them to hospitals in surrounding cities.
Bundaberg Hospital's disaster emergency plan swung into action as the first of the injured began arriving. All staff in the area called in to attend to crash victims, two of them seriously hurt. The two train drivers were among the worst injured.
They're both able to speak. They both got relatively minor injuries, not serious from our point of view.
And nor were most of the passengers, suffering mostly cuts, bruises and soft tissue injuries. The last thing Ron Seymour remembers was the speed of the train recorded on the in-house video.
I can remember 157 and all of a sudden a shake and we were over.
I settled down and dozed, and the next thing I know, I'm sliding along like this on the side of the car, and the side of the car was on the ground. It had left the lines completely.
There were amazing stories of luck. Frank Houdini, a Brisbane escapologist, got out with barely a scratch.
The carriage just went bang onto the ground, and they catapulted me out of the train.
3-year-old Jake was flung from his mother's side. For Nicole Edwards, it was an unwanted 21st birthday present, as she spent terrifying minutes searching for him.
I got thrown everywhere, and then I couldn't find him, and I was trying to grab him, and it was pitch dark.
Happily, they were reunited unhurt in the eerie calm after the crash. All passengers amazed at the lack of panic. In the minutes after the crash, when everyone was stumbling around in the dark looking for their loved ones, there was still time to share a joke amongst a new band of friends.
Then we started hammering out the window, and somebody down the back says, "Oh," he said, "you'll get paid, you'll have to pay for that window." Everybody cracked up, and one bloke turned around and says, "Yeah, now I know why it's a tilt train."
Premier Peter Beattie visited the injured in hospital.
And good luck. Okay, see you back on the train.
The lucky ones allowed to leave hospital into the welcome arms of family this afternoon. Fewer than 30 remain in hospital tonight. Tony Fabris, TED News.
If you're concerned about relatives or friends who may have been on the Cairns-bound Tilt train, call this special police hotline, 1800 100 188. That's 1800 100 188.
The crash has forced other northern train services to be suspended until the line is back in operation. Nervous passengers on a second Tilt train have arrived safely in Brisbane, but hundreds of other travellers have been diverted to buses.
Queensland's second Tilt train journeyed safely from Bundaberg to Brisbane just 5 hours after its sister train crashed. Passengers relieved they made it intact after a short delay to the start of their trip.
15 minutes. Yeah. They actually put us on the train and then pulled us back off. It was a bit scary thinking, well, we had to get on the train and go.
Brisbane was the end of the line. All Tilt train runs are suspended for at least the next day. 8 trainloads of passengers have been rerouted. Commuters who expected a quick rail ride to Rockhampton today reduced to the road.
We were looking forward so much to the Tilt train today because I have a thing about trains, but never mind.
I was to catch the Tilt train at 11 o'clock and go on the Tilt train to Rockhampton. Now I've got to sit in a bus.
Most left thinking of less fortunate travellers.
Get home a bit later, but that's neither here nor there. You've got to feel for the poor people that have been hurt.
For the next 24 hours, Queensland Rail will be moving hundreds of passengers by charter coach. The tilt trains won't be back in commission until the rails are cleared by inspectors. Queensland Rail revealing the diesel-powered locomotive which crashed has a blemish on its record.
It was an engine malfunction. The exact details I don't know, but it was a minor engine malfunction.
But bosses point to the tilt train's added coach strength.
The interesting thing about this particular tilt train, I think, is the survivability and the fact that you look at what has actually occurred, that the train is in remarkable condition.
The rail union's so far satisfied that the service and rail line have been well maintained.
The reports we have back from the people involved with the tilt train is they're very satisfied with the service.
The Premier pointing to Queensland Rail's safety record.
This track is maintained very regularly. It's one of the best tracks in Australia, but clearly something went wrong. We will find out what went wrong, and clearly we'll take appropriate action to fix it in the future.
While the clean-up continues, Queensland Rail's call centres are packed with extra staff, rerouting passengers and assisting families and friends. Sharon Marshall, 10 News.
To Cairns was slowing down from a high speed to a slower speed zone. The 7 carriages and 2 locos all derailed.
It was an absolutely horrendous sight. And
they're relieved it didn't happen just 200 metres further along the track on an old wooden bridge.
It was the fastest thing on tracks Queenslanders had ever seen. The first tilt train in the Southern Hemisphere rolled into Roma Street 6 years ago this month. Its appeal, instantaneous, with a new rail service.
We believe it's the first time in Australia that an airline has taken on a train deliberately.
But when the tilt train jumped the tracks in May of 2000, its fast track to success literally derailed. Travel plans for more than 500 Queensland Rail passengers were thrown into chaos as the scenic coastal route was cut. Rail tourism didn't take long to recover, though. The state government injected $139 million to expand the service from Brisbane to Cairns in June 2003. The 1,700-kilometre trip took just under 25 hours, 7 hours faster than its predecessor. In its first year on the new route, the tilt train carried more than 27,000 passengers on 311 journeys to and from Cairns. Queensland Rail says it expects that popularity will continue to grow, regardless of today's derailment. Ty Marega, 7 News.
Find out why Queensland's tilt train crashed overnight, injuring more than 120 people. 5 people were seriously hurt, 2 critically, when the high-tech train speared off the tracks near Rosedale, north of Bundaberg. The tilt train is the fastest narrow-gauge passenger service in the world, but some of those aboard say it was nowhere near full speed when it was derailed. Emergency crews say they're astounded no one was killed.
Queensland's state-of-the-art tilt train took to the tracks in 1998. With obvious pride, the Premier showed off his new arrival.
Nowhere else in Australia or in the Southern Hemisphere do we have a tilt train like this. So Jeff Kennett, eat your heart out.
The slick new system cut 2 hours off the regular service from Brisbane to Rockhampton, travelling up to 170 kilometres an hour. The government hoped the tilt train would attract international passengers and rival the great train journeys of the world. But that was before today. But it's not the first incident. In 2000, a slow-travelling tilt train was derailed a short distance from today's scene. The government and Queensland Rail have rejected claims the gauge of the track is too narrow.
They were at the controls a short time later on the main line when the train came to a bend where the speed limit drops from 150 kilometres an hour to 60. Within
The 2 Brisbane to Cairns tilt trains began operating in June last year and have carried nearly 70,000 travellers who've relished the personal entertainment computers, reclining seats and dining services. At times, the trains travel at 160 kilometres an hour, slashing the journey to just under 25 hours.
Back on track today with the first freight and passenger services since Tuesday's tilt train derailment near Bundaberg. And for now, drivers have backed away from threats of a strike, but that could change if Cabinet doesn't legislate to protect witnesses at the inquiry into the accident.
While train services got back underway this morning, Queensland Rail's CEO was making sure things stayed on track, meeting with train drivers who were threatening a snap strike over the company going public with news the tilt train was speeding before the accident.
and I felt that you have to weigh up coming out and giving people a key piece of information as opposed to it being leaked through some source.
At the 11th hour, the drivers voted against the strike, earning the praise of their employer and the government.
To have a strike at this time would be, in fact, counterproductive.
I thank them for what they've done. I think it is a very common sense thing to do. I appreciate what they've done. Now let the inquiry get on with it and let's find out what really happened.
But the union is demanding the state government rethink its current legislation to ensure those who give evidence to the inquiry into the crash are protected.
We are going to have a look at what we can do in terms of immunity with respect to witness statements, and it's not just about drivers, it would be about anyone who provided a witness statement.
If there's not a amendment to that legislation or something equivalent put in place, then the union will be reviewing its situation.
Despite the events of the past week, Queensland Rail says it's as busy as ever and has had a large number of passenger inquiries since the crash. Those boarding trains in Bundaberg today had no concerns.
No, not at all.
No, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So no use being afraid of it.
Queensland Rail's pretty safe.
For the time being, Queensland Rail has released a revised timetable. Alex Graham, ABC News, Bundaberg.
Emergency workers were astounded this week when not a single person was killed as a tilt train crashed north of Bundaberg. More than 120 people were injured, but only a handful seriously when the high-speed train derailed at Rosedale in the early hours of Tuesday morning. As the Premier visited the injured in hospital and praised rescue workers, an investigation was underway into the cause of the crash. Just a day after the accident, Queensland Rail released black box data showing the train was travelling at almost twice the speed limit. But the early release of that information angered train drivers who feared they were being made scapegoats. Authorities appealed for calm as workers threatened to take statewide strike action. Today at a meeting in Bundaberg, train drivers voted not to go ahead with the 24-hour strike action. However, the union is demanding the state government change existing legislation to ensure those who give evidence at the inquiry into the crash are protected. Our reporter Alex Graham was at today's meeting in Bundaberg and she spoke to the Rail, Tram and Bus Union State Secretary Owen Dugan.
Well, Owen Dugan, welcome to State Line.
Thank you.
Why was the decision of your members today not to strike?
Well, we had to take a number of things into consideration. Firstly, we took into consideration the response we got from the BT government, and that was that they are prepared to look at the legislation in Cabinet on Monday, which could protect the train crew who were involved in this accident, but more importantly, it can protect all the train crew throughout Queensland in any similar sort of incident in the future. Secondly, we took into consideration that the fact that the Chief Executive had been forced in some ways to have made a statement as a result of the Commissioner for Police advising that he was going to make that statement. And we also got some guarantees about the protection of the drivers from the Chief Executive today.
What was it that Queensland Rail has done since the crash that made your drivers so upset?
Well, I think it's not just what Queensland Rail has done, it's also the fact that the state legislation was being used, and the state legislation doesn't provide the same protection to witnesses in accidents as the federal legislation does.
In terms of the speed limit, there was some concern voiced by drivers that that was a detail that should never have been released. Can your members understand why the public, and in fact the passengers that were on that train, had a right to know?
No one said it should never be released. Our members believed it should have been released with all the other information at when the preliminary report is published after the investigation. Then it can be taken in context, taken into consideration all the potential influences that resulted in the accident.
So in effect, it was felt that the information was released prematurely.
If you take that information out of context, you put unnecessary pressure on the train crew. There are a number of other issues that could have impacted on that particular speed, and they're not really taken into consideration if you don't have the whole report.
I believe the Transport Minister has given you some assurances that that legislation will be changed. Are you now waiting on a decision from Cabinet?
Absolutely. We are very pleased with the position of Paul Lucas and of Peter Beattie, and we'll certainly be waiting with interest to see what the outcome of the discussions at Cabinet are on Monday.
So the stop work is on hold for now, but you'll be meeting again next week?
Well, at this point in time, we will wait to see what happens out of that, and then on Tuesday or Wednesday, we'll give consideration to the outcome of that particular issue.
Owen Dugan, thanks for joining State Line.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And on Monday, State Cabinet is expected to consider that urgent submission on whether Queensland laws need to be changed to help the crash investigation.